I'm the chair of the CRTPA. I'd like to call this meeting to order. It's Monday, October 19th, 2020 at 1:30 p.m. and we are broadcasting this meeting on WCOT, accessible on Comcast Channel 13, as well as online at www.talgov.com. This meeting is being conducted virtually as authorized pursuant to the Governor's Executive Order number 20-69, which was most recently extended by Executive Order 20-246. Public comments desired to be made during the meeting may be submitted on the CRTPA's website at www.crtpa.org. Any comments that have been received by 5 p.m. Friday, October 16th, 2020 have been placed on this meeting's agenda webpage and provided to CRTPA members. Any comments received after that time will be accepted and included as part of the official record of this meeting. Now, Luana, would do the roll call, please?
Thank you for unmuting me. I was having trouble finding it. All right. So, Commissioner Barfield.
Here.
Commissioner Allen.
Here.
Commissioner Merritt.
Here.
Commissioner Deloge. Commissioner Dozier.
I'm here.
Commissioner Maddox.
Here.
Commissioner Minor.
Mr. Minor.
I'm here, present.
Okay. Commissioner Matlow.
I'm here.
Thank you. And Commissioner Richardson.
Here.
And Commissioner Williams Cox. Thank you. That's everyone.
Good.
Full house.
Excellent. Greg, any agenda modifications?
No, sir.
Any public comment?
No, sir. We did not receive any public comment either.
Okay, do we have a motion on the consent agenda?
Chairman. So moved.
Second.
Okay. Are there any opposed? Excellent. Greg, item 6, please.
Okay. Just real quick, Elon, let's note that Commissioner Deloge is here as well. I didn't see him pop up, but I heard he make the motion on the consent agenda, so he is here.
Right. All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the first item up, 6A, is a presentation on the Intelligent Transportation Systems, or ITS Master Plan. If you recall, this is a plan that we co-funded with the City of Tallahassee in looking at long-term intelligent transportation system need. Josh Hollingsworth from the Regional Traffic Management Center is here to give us some presentation. And this is strictly for informational purposes today. We're not seeking any type of action. Josh, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, great. Thanks, Greg. Let me share my screen real quick. All right, so good afternoon, commissioners. It's a pleasure to be here and talk to you about something that's near and dear to my heart, the ITS Master Plan. My name is Josh Hollingsworth, and I am the signal timing engineer out of the Regional Transportation Management Center. I like to tell folks I'm in charge of the green lights, but if you have a problem with the red lights, you need to talk to my boss about that, so you can pass those questions his way. We're going to talk to you about the ITS Master Plan. We're not going to rehash what was covered back at the board retreat in October. I guess it's been a year now. The plan is now developed, and so this focus is going to be on the proposed project list that came out of that, as well as a brief discussion at the end talking about looking to the future when it comes to connected and autonomous vehicles. So what is this ITS Master Plan? Intelligent Transportation Systems. The idea is that when we build a roadway, we want to have a way that we can monitor how that roadway is being used to identify when we're having congestion, and then to make and take action if possible, whether that's through adjusting signal timings or providing information to drivers so that we can maximize the efficiency and use of our existing capacity. So this plan is just to simply provide that roadmap of how we're going to plan, implement, operate, and maintain those devices, as well as the communication assets that are associated with them. So our hope is that this plan...
Josh, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but actually we cannot see the presentation.
Oh, you're not seeing it? That would...
No.
Let me try this again.
Sorry. There we go.
No, I'm glad you said that. Thank you. Is that coming through there?
We've got it now.
Okay, great. Let's see here. Great. So the process that we went through for this this development was essentially to get together the stakeholders to identify what the vision, the goals, what are the needs and the issues that we face, what looks at our existing inventory, and then look at the emerging technologies that are out there and identify some projects and strategies that can help address some of those issues. When we have the comprehensive project list, we then went through a prioritization plan to identify some phases in which those projects could be tackled. And so I'm going to focus most of the presentation on that last piece. But I did want to call your attention just again to that vision that came out of the ITS Master Plan development, and particularly the idea that our goal is reliable mobility throughout our region. And we do that through using innovative technology as well as regional collaboration. That's really the pieces that we're using to be able to get that reliable mobility. So here's a quick snapshot of what we currently have when we think about our ITS infrastructure. Often we think about traffic signals being one of the big ones. We've got all the signals within Leon County as well as a few in Gaston County that are tied back to our system here at the Traffic Management Center. We've got a variety of sensors, vehicle sensors, bike sensors, pedestrian sensors that are all giving us information real time, as well as CCTV cameras, 97 of those that are positioned at strategic locations to give us real-time, up-to-date information about what's happened on our roadways. So with all of that information coming back here via our fiber optic cable and our cellular modems, we're then able to analyze that information and then make adjustments as necessary to our signal timing or provide that information to drivers. And I also wanted to call your attention on the bottom right of that slide. You'll see the bus systems with our AVL, the vehicle locators, as well as something called a DSRC radio, which stands for Dedicated Short Range Communication Radio. That deals in the automated autonomous vehicles and connected vehicles landscape. And so I'm going to talk about that a little bit more at the very end of this presentation. What you see here is the comprehensive list that was generated from the ITS Master Plan. All of these projects have been grouped into some major categories: traffic management, transit management, etc. And they're all detailed in the ITS Master Plan, but the goal for this is to focus on those 5 that you see listed or highlighted in blue. Those are the 5 that were presented last month as part of the ITS prioritized project list. So we're going to cover those in some more detail. So we took that whole list of projects and then looked at how do these projects play into safety, mobility, what's the benefit to cost ratio we're going to get out of these projects in order so we can get the best bang for our buck, and then also looking at the regional support, having some input from the users of these ITS infrastructures so we can prioritize these projects into a plan that we can maybe put into place. And I'm going to take you through those 3 phases. So we've got a near term, which would be the 2 to 5 year time frame, and you can see that 3 of those projects are already on the prioritized project list. That's the CCTV camera upgrade, as well as the adaptive traffic signal control on US 90. The midterm, 5 to 10 years, we've got 3 more: the I-10 Trailblazers, the cabinet upgrades, and the transit signal priority. Again, we'll talk about those in some more detail after these next 2 slides. And then our long-term, 10-plus years, the focus here is really on our communications infrastructure, continuing to expand that and make sure we've got a robust communications system. That's really going to lay the groundwork for the connected and autonomous vehicle needs that are on the horizon. And then the last kind of grouping that we had was the programmatic projects. Those are our yearly recurrence projects, things like the flashing yellow arrow upgrades, expanding our system detectors, things of that nature. So I want to go ahead and get into each of these projects, explain to you what they are in a little more detail, as well as what some of the benefits they provide. So the CCTV cameras, you'll kind of see that as 2 different pieces. The first part is an upgrade project to our existing infrastructure. So we currently have 97 analog cameras, and we're wanting to upgrade to the digital cameras. There's also some back-end work that has to be done back here at the Traffic Management Center in order to get all those feeds in and make them useful. So that first project is to do both the replacement of the field devices as well as the upgrades back at the Traffic Management Center. What that's going to give us is, one, ability to stream at higher resolution, but the ability really more so is the increased scalability that it provides. Right now, those analog cameras take up a big chunk of our communications infrastructure. When we go to the digital cameras, we're able to expand the amount of cameras that we've got on our existing infrastructure. What that's going to pave the way is for those next phases. And those next 2 phases are to identify those gaps where we currently don't have camera coverage and to fill those in so that we can have better information about what's going on so that we can make those adjustments as well as let folks know what's happening on the roadways. Next project is the adaptive traffic signal control. The idea behind this is that we're going to increase system detection so that we know the vehicles as they arrive into our corridor as well as they travel through the corridor, And the system is able to measure that and monitor that and make dynamic and real-time changes to the traffic signal timings. Right now, it's based more on a time of day basis, so we know what the typical patterns are, and we can set some of those things. But this is going to give you a more dynamic, responsive system. And the studies have shown that they're really, this technology is better suited for corridors where you have a dynamic traffic patterns. So the two locations that were identified in this were Tennessee Street, right along by the campus, as well as Appalachian Parkway, where we have a lot of the retail. That's where we experience a good bit of dynamic nature to our traffic patterns and really best suited for this type of technology. The next project is the transit signal priority. And it's, excuse my kind of rudimentary drawing here, but I think it communicates what the idea is. Right now, emergency vehicles have a similar capability. When a fire truck is approaching a signal, it can send that signal to the traffic signal to say, I'm here, and the signal can turn green to get the vehicle through the intersection. It's the same idea, not quite the same level of priority with the transit, but the same idea is that if we know where the bus is, we know that that bus might be behind schedule, and we can go ahead and turn the light, either extend the green a little bit longer or allow the green to come up sooner to get the bus through, keep the bus on time. The idea is to try to improve those on-time bus performance numbers as well as just reduce the bus travel times to make our system more reliable. We upgraded our controllers, that's the brains of the traffic signal, back in 2016, which allows us to take advantage of this. And we also upgrade our preemption system, which is what the emergency vehicles are using. So this piece with the transit signal priority is simply adding some more devices to the buses themselves to take advantage of this technology. The next project is the I-10 Trailblazer project. This has been talked about for probably about the last 10 years or so. How do we handle these incidents, major incidents, particularly as they relate to an I-10 freeway closure? So right now when an incident happens on I-10 and folks are detoured off of I-10 onto the local roads, motorists are kind of left to their own devices when they get off of the freeway. The idea is how can we get more information to those drivers and direct them along predefined routes so that we can minimize traffic delays, not only to those that are trying to get on the detour route, but also the other users of our local streets during these incidents. So let me mention this before we go to the next slide. You see those two pictures there kind of give you an idea of what we're talking about. If we can place some dynamic signs at key locations along those corridors, we can give that information to all the drivers that are on the roadway. It could be the larger sign that you see with the text on it, but it could just be a smaller side-mounted sign that provides a shield of the route that we're talking about and the direction that you head. You can see from an overview of our area that US 90 typically becomes that alternate detour route for I-10. We know, though, that during the middle of PM rush hour, that may not be the best way to have 18-wheelers going through the middle of town. There's opportunities to send folks different directions, but we've got to be able to communicate that to them. We can also adjust the signal timings for these predefined routes. So that's the idea behind that project. The last project I wanted to touch on is this cabinet upgrade. I've got two pictures there. The one on the left is our existing cabinet. If you were to look inside of that, that's I call it the guts of the cabinet. And the newer cabinets are going to allow us to take the inside of the cabinet and really squeeze it down to half the space. Now what this does is gives us more energy efficiency because it has lower power requirements, but it also gives us space within the cabinet for a growth platform for additional devices as we are seeing this growth in the connected and autonomous vehicle landscape. So right now, we don't have a lot of room in our existing cabinet. So if we're going to try to add more devices, we're looking at having to put additional cabinets out there. If we go with the cabinet upgrade, it's going to allow us to use the same footprint of our existing cabinets, but have more space to keep those devices. And it's also just going to give us even more inputs and outputs as we have a more an increasingly complex transportation system. It's going to give us an ability to keep pace with that. And so that's the idea with the cabinet upgrade project. And that kind of leads me to this discussion about when we talk about connected and autonomous vehicles. So you may have seen this chart before. It was put out by the Society of Automotive Engineers, and it talks about the different levels of autonomous vehicles. And you can see from level 0, no automation, that's your classic pickup truck, to the level 5, full automation, no driver necessary. Now we're not there yet, obviously, but you can see that over the years we've made quite a number of steps in the automotive industry in some of these level 1, level 2. When we talk about this, if you think about things like dynamic cruise control, or the fact that your vehicle can even decelerate if you're approaching the car in front of you too quickly, or sensing the lane And if you're moving outside of that lane, it can give you a warning, or in some cases, some of the newer vehicles are able to kind of guide you in the right direction. So we're seeing this happening. The automotive industry is definitely moving forward in these directions. And as this changes, it really does change the landscape of our transportation infrastructure. So we want to be thinking about that. Now, the state of Florida is leaning forward in this. You'll notice that on the left of that slide, you can see all the different connected and autonomous vehicle initiatives that the state is currently looking at. And you can see they're all over the state, but I want to call your attention particularly to the ones that are in our area, number 1 and number 2. And on the right, you can kind of see where those devices are deployed. So we've got the picture there is a DSRC, Dedicated Short Range Communication Radio. And the idea is that that radio is connected to the traffic signal. And it knows when the signal is green, when it's yellow, when it's red. And that radio is able to send information out to onboard units in a vehicle to receive that information and then turn that information into messages for a driver. Right now, this is a proof of concept. So it's more so designed to kind of dip your toes into the water, begin to see what are the challenges that are going to be involved in maintaining these devices, operating these devices. How is it going to work? There's a partnership between us as well as the Florida Department of Transportation and with FAMU FSU College of Engineering. They're doing some studies along this corridor as well with this technology. And the other piece to that is the security credentialing management system. So one of the challenges that comes up a lot in these conversations with connected and autonomous vehicles is the security piece. And so this is given a chance to kind of work through some of those issues and seeing how that's going to work on a larger scale. How do you credential security for these types of systems? So I just wanted to kind of highlight these things. Obviously, there still is a lot of discussion and conversation that's going on in this world, but we just wanted to show that there is this idea of wanting to look forward and think about what's to come and things that we could be doing now when it comes to communication, establishing that good communications backbone and upgrading cabinets and such to be able to posture ourselves for some of these changes as they come on the horizon. So with that, I hope that it was informational. I'm happy to answer any questions that may be out there.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Joshua, thank you very much for the presentation. Really interesting work. I know you and your team spend a lot of time and effort on security, as you said. I'm sure it involves, preventing hacking, encryption. Can you talk a little bit more about what you all are doing to make sure that people can't hack into the system, change signals, that type of thing?
Sure. Yeah. So there definitely it's obviously a big concern on the security side. So there's a lot of just physical security pieces, right? Having cabinets locked, securing the access to the actual cabinets themselves. We've got alerts in our system, to let us know if there happen to be someone in a cabinet that's not supposed to be there. There's also just the simple things of password protection, those sort of things for the actual devices that are out there. Right now, there's not things coming back into our system. When we start talking about connected vehicles and the idea of there being information transmitted both ways, that's where that security credentialing comes in. So that still, at this point, is in a test environment, and that's what the state is really taking a big effort of that, because they're looking at this statewide too. This is going to be the same challenge no matter if you're in Tallahassee or if you're down in Ocala or Orlando, anywhere else in the state. So that's maybe the short answer on that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Any other questions? Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. Interesting presentation, Josh. And I gotta say, the best background ever for Zoom, and it's not artificial. So if you haven't done a tour of the transportation, you can tell me the exact name of it, but at the CDA, that is a great background. So well done.
Thank you. I had a picture of the old one, but I decided maybe I'd go ahead and stay with the state-of-the-art one this time.
I think that's good. That's good. I always love to see young people's face when they go on tours at the CDA and they just see that wall of screens that to them just looks like televisions, right?
That's right.
So, I digress. Sorry. Okay, so this is very interesting, and I kind of want to split my questions here, because on one side, this is a fantastic work product from you and your team and the consultants. it's really forward thinking. I like, they've got everything from public transit through the safety, the hacking that Commissioner Minor just mentioned. I know that's probably not your term, but we'll use it for shorthand. And I really think this is going to be beneficial for our community going forward. Hearing a lot of the same things talked about with the MCORS process with Suncoast, and you have just filled out some details that weren't in those presentations, so I also appreciate that. So for that piece of it, I have just a couple of questions for you, but then for Greg, I'm going to turn this back to our regional mobility plan, which is kind of a different set of questions that came up, and that gets the project prioritization. So I don't want any of those questions to be taken as concerns about your report. I really, and the plans for the future. So with that, the cabinet upgrades, something that stuck out to me there, and correct me if I'm not remembering this correctly. After the storms, Hermine, Irma, and Michael, all three of them, it seems like we improved our strategy working together, city, county, with the state, with DOT, but we had to roll out a number of generators. Those were staged in advance with Michael. That was a really good step in the right direction after our experience with Hermine, and you're nodding, so I think I'm on the right track. So that really has stood out to me, and when I saw the example and read some about the cabinet upgrades, it seems like the lower powered and being able to do this work may help keep the systems online when we run into those long-term emergencies in the future. Is that right?
Yes, that is right. And I forgot to mention this too when you think about even the connected and autonomous vehicles. Again, we're relying on systems to be working and running. And so, yes, obviously as technology is improving on just battery backup systems, that's one piece of it. But the other piece is reducing your power requirements. So you can have longer, we do have some backup power sources at a lot of the critical intersections, but that time can be truncated depending on how much usage there is. So keeping the power requirements down is going to help us keep those up longer, and great benefit.
And probably restore them more quickly, I would think.
That's right. Yes, sure. Be able to restore it more quickly.
Okay, well, that's when county hears about city traffic engineering, that's been the biggest deep dive we've gone into that in my experience. So that was top of my mind. The other part is more related to some of the presentations at Suncoast, and when talking about autonomous vehicles and these signal phasing, the management systems, those types of things, there was a question about broadband and the intersection. Does a community, does a particular area of I-10 need to have broadband in order to have these amenities, for lack of a better word? My impression was they don't, that you could deploy this type of autonomous and connected I'm going to stop there. I'm not going to do your job for you, Josh, because I'm going to lose this is way over my pay grade for this. But do we need Wi-Fi? Will it work in rural areas? Does it have to be in the urban area? Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, I can. So there's still, I think the question is definitely still out there as a debate. Some of this has to do with the 5G. So a lot of it has to do with latency. So right now, how long is it going to take for that information to go from the device to the user? And there are some aspects of connected vehicles that could pass information on, and there's not a super need for like a real fast communication. Things like, hey, there's an incident that's a couple miles down the road. But when you're talking about a safety message that has to do with how quickly a red light runner or something like that, now you're talking about needing very quick information to be passed back and forth. That's why there's a kind of a toss-up between the DSRC radios that we're talking about and the 5G. Is it going to come via cellular service? Whether or not you can do that through using cell phone communication or the fiber optic cable. So I would say that's kind of a long answer to say the jury is still out, I think, on that, on what the best way. But I think in both cases, there's going to be some potential aspects that are better suited for the broadband or the kind of connect the fiber optic cable. and some that are going to be still usable through more of a remote possibility. So, but I think the jury's still out in some extent.
Okay, so for the projects you have on that you've identified, I would guess in the short and medium term at least, you're contemplating this, and those projects are probably within the city limits where we might already have fiber or some other way to accommodate that. Is that right?
That's right. And I think, piece I didn't mention in the presentation, what part of this too, when we think about planning for this, when we're doing new developments in Beverly, we're working with DOT as well to make sure that when we're widening that road, let's make sure we get conduit, make sure we get fiber put in on that project. That's the best time to do it, while you're doing that road work. And so we're working to make sure that's in there when we're doing these projects.
Okay, so thank you for that. That was a good series of answers and a lot of information. And so now I get to turn to Greg Slay and simply say, this came up during our regional mobility plan discussion because it stuck out to some of us. And I will admit I've got the agenda from last time in front of me, but those numbers, the specific breakdown was included, I think, in Allison's presentation.
Yes,
so
ma'am.
It's not in our agenda, but if my notes are correct, there was a good amount of funding set aside for ITS versus the intersection improvements and bike ped projects that also have a set aside. And
I believe it was ITS, intersections, and safety.
oh, and safety.
And Commissioner, if you can hold on just a second, I believe Jack had this, has got that table ready. Yeah, here we go.
Okay.
Everybody can see that. Nope, I'm sorry, it was bike ped. I thought it was safety.
I'm just reading your agenda, that's all.
Sorry about that.
For that. So everything Josh has talked about, I mean, this is high dollar. This is a 20-year plan. It will help Tallahassee, and I think, by extension, those from Gassamakella and Jefferson and others who come into our community. But what stuck out to me on the plan was how much money we are dedicating to the set aside for the ITS versus bike ped and intersection, and assuming ITS, at least for the near future, is going to be exclusively within Leon, Tallahassee, and mostly within the urban service area, which, again, to that last question, that has this connectivity already. So I'm not against ITS, but I still want to understand where those decisions were, and I think it is something that we need to talk about because the priority of ITS over the others could shift money out of the rural area of Leon and our other 3 counties. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure, and we talked about it, after the meeting last month at the staff level, and I think we probably made a mistake when we presented it the way we did. I mean, really, you could have intersection improvements that include ITS projects. So probably what we thought about what might be a better thing is to kind of rework that a little bit and combine that ITS and intersection improvements to make it more of, for lack of a better term, I'd say kind of spot improvements. Because, you could do some ITS deployment, if you've got a congested intersection in Gadsden or Wakulla County, you have the potential to do some ITS deployments there. You could do some crash detection and things like that. So it wasn't the intent just to say that we're going to spend all this much more money on ITS and now these other things. I think we should have presented that a little bit differently and kind of blended at least the ITS and the intersection improvements, if that makes sense.
It does. I would just simply say, and Mr. Chair, this is my last, that if we could see a little something at our next meeting or the next, within the next few months that kind of unpacks that a little bit. Sure. I think that would help me. I'm guessing it would help some of the others just think about how the set aside is going to be applied in the future. And I would be comfortable at that point.
Well, and let me clarify too, when we say set aside in that context, we don't mean that we're going to set aside that exact percentage every year for those projects. That's set up more as a working number throughout the life of the plan. DOT says we have, X million, $100 million over the 25 years. We just took those percentages and said, by and large, we just want to make sure that everybody understands, especially DOT and federal highway, that, ITS and intersection improvements are a priority of ours. So we're going to allocate some level of funding, or at least show that we want to fund those through the life of the plan. But it is not set up to be that we're going to dedicate 7.5% exactly every year for ITS improvements.
Okay. That may have been a problem on my end. I missed the first part of what you were saying. It was muted. So we can talk about that later if everyone else caught that answer. And so I'm not sure what you said about unpacking this at a future meeting, but I'll leave it alone and let others ask their questions. So Josh, thank you for your presentation, all your work.
Sure.
And well, I think if I can just clarify quickly, hopefully everybody can hear it this time, you'll see that in a bit different format for the adoption meeting next month for the regional mobility plan.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Josh and Greg, item 6B.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to turn it over to Greg Burke. He's the project manager for the Midtown Area Transportation Plan Phase 2, so I will let him take it away.
Good afternoon, members. So here we are 3 years since the initiation of the Midtown Area Transportation Plan. A lot has changed as evidenced by this virtual meeting. One thing, however, that has not changed is the importance of this project, and perhaps today more so than before. The plan identifies short, mid, and long-term improvements developed through significant public input. With that, I would like to turn over the presentation to Kate Widness with KHA.
Thanks, Greg. Can everyone see my screen, hopefully?
Yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, like Greg said, this has been a long time coming. We started this back in 2018, so it's incredible to think we are almost in 2021. That was the first phase of the project, and what phase 1 really did was phase 1 focused on traffic and operations analysis for the Midtown area. So what it looked at was what was feasible in the Midtown area that can improve transportation options. What we did during phase 2 was we took those recommendations out to the public as well as stakeholders to further refine what the phase 1 alternatives that were feasible, how we could continue to evolve them moving forward, and just really did the public outreach. So that process was really informing, consulting, and collaborating. And phase 2 is what we're going to talk about here today. So this might look familiar to a lot of you. This was what we showed after phase 1, where we identified all the different alternatives that were evaluated during phase 1. So you could see those alternatives listed on the left side of the table, and the ones that are green at the top of the page were ones that were found to either improve our level of service or make better connectivity within the Midtown area, and the ones at the bottom were things that we found were not going to improve transportation in the Midtown area. So the things that we found from phase 1 that we did move forward into phase 2 and presented to the public were things like where Beard Street and North Gadsden intersect is realigning that intersection, making it a little bit safer out there, looking at the possibility of even adding a crosswalk, because we know a lot of people move from Beard Street over to the Midtown area, crossing Gadsden in that area. Looking at the sidewalk connectivity, identifying where there are gaps, such as North Gadsden Street from 6th Avenue to Thomasville Road. How can we start to fill in those gaps and make sure that it's continuous and easy for people to access the businesses that are out there, as well as places that people want to frequent with residents and everything else. Placemaking in complete streets was a big thing that we saw, of looking at what are things that we could do out there on the roadways. How are there ways that we can maybe make this more of a place, make the streets more conducive to other modes of transportation, as well as the one-way southbound on Thomasville Road. So there were two options that were feasible. One of them went from North Gadsden Street down to 6th Avenue, and the other one that was feasible was North Gadsden Street all the way down to Monroe Street, so through the entire Midtown corridor. Things that didn't move forward, which a lot of people have asked about as we've been in phase 2, is the roundabout at the 5 Points intersection where Thomasville, Meridian, and Gadsden meet. There were two options that were evaluated that really we just felt were not going to improve the level of service that were out there, as well as there were some issues with the grade changes as well as available right-of-way. And then we also looked at changing 6th and 7th Avenue to bi-directional roadways instead of the existing one-ways, but there were some issues with the intersections when we looked at that project. So the ones in the greens were the ones that we brought forward in phase 2 to bring out to the public. So with phase 2, we completed a lot of public engagement. We had several stakeholder meetings. This included meeting with the Midtown merchants, city and county staff. We also had several meetings with the Midtown Working Group that was developed through the Tallahassee-Leon County Planning Department. We met with different local neighborhood associations, had local pop-up events. We had one at Waterworks, one at Red Eye Coffee, just to attract people who were living in the area, who were out there on weekends or maybe evenings to come and learn about the project and provide their input. We had public meetings where over 100 citizens came and participated at these 2 meetings. So that was really, you know, a great thing when we see that many people want to come out to a public meeting, as well as we had a final open house that had a lot of people show up for that to look at the recommendations. And we also completed a project survey, which many of you may have taken and seen, where we had over 600 of those surveys completed. And there was actually participants from all over Leon County, including every zip code was representative, which was really great because we wanted to hear from people who not only lived in Midtown, but worked in Midtown, frequented it, as well as traveled through the area. And we really felt that we captured that with the project survey. So this is just kind of a summary of the participants when things were conducted. And at the end of the day, we can, you know, proudly say that we engaged hundreds of community members for this second phase of the Midtown Area Transportation Plan. Now, some of these were overlapped. People who took the survey also came to the workshops, but I think it was really encouraging just to see how many people really did want to provide their input on this project and really did provide some great feedback. And that's where we got some key takeaways as well as some of the recommendations for this plan. So some of the things that we really heard from the engagement, this was slightly disheartening to hear, was how unsafe a lot of people, especially the residents who lived in the Midtown area, felt using the existing transportation facilities like some of the sidewalks. You know, it wasn't even that they felt the sidewalks were inadequate. It was more of how close the sidewalks were to the roads and how fast people travel through the Midtown area. So what are things that we could do out there to maybe slow traffic and encourage people to think about what would it be like to have more pedestrians out here and make it more of a place? How do we encourage people to park once in the Midtown area and frequent several different places by walking within that area? Having connected and accessible transportation facilities, making sure that sidewalks were connected. We had opportunities for bicyclists out there, making sure it was connected to transit as well. Things like the trolley comes through the Midtown area. Pedestrian facilities and street trees were really desired. We did something called a Build a Street activity at one of the public meetings. I'm not sure if anybody participated in that, but we allow people, we give them right away, and we allow them to build their own street. And those were the types of amenities that most people wanted to see within Midtown area, were things like sidewalks, shared use path, as well as landscaping and trees. And there was support for reducing vehicular lane footprint to accommodate other modes, to look at what can be done within the existing right-of-way. And that brings me into the recommendations. So the way we have these broken down are by short, mid, and long-term recommendations. Some are things that will be done by partnerships throughout the city and the county, as well as we're going to highlight some supporting projects just to kind of highlight that we know Midtown, there are a lot of things happening, it's exciting, and we're going to start to see some really great changes there when it comes to the transportation network. So these are some of the recommendations that we'll walk through today. So One of them is Meridian Road was really identified as a gap within the transportation network. So from 7th Avenue on Meridian Road, that's where Midtown Caboose is located, we're recommending that a sidewalk be placed on that corridor that connects where the sidewalk currently ends up to south of Tharp Street, right in front of the church there, where the sidewalk on the northern part of this area currently ends. So we've recommended that a study be looked at to determine if this is feasible, just because there are some right-of-way constraints along this area, and we know that that's going to make adding a sidewalk very difficult, but looking at a study to see if there are opportunities maybe to put all the utilities on one side of the corridor to accommodate at least a 5-foot sidewalk on the other side of the corridor would be really great and really help with connectivity. It also helps to get some movement going from those that live in Los Robles right there. We had, I believe, 2 meetings with that neighborhood association, or at least one, and then they had several participants who had come to the public meeting, but they really felt very isolated in terms of the connectivity. You know, they live right there in Midtown, but it's very difficult for them to get out of their neighborhood by foot or by bike safely to access all the great things that are right there in their neighborhood. So that's another recommendation, is also looking at having an RFB crosswalk at DeSoto Street, which connects Los Robles to Lake Ella, and then if there was a sidewalk on Meridian, that would then bring that extension further south to everything else within the Midtown area. So next. This slide. Okay, so then some other recommendations we have are short-term, looking at a speed study and some traffic calming along 6th and 7th Avenue. So I mentioned that we did look at turning those 2 corridors bi-directional, which didn't really seem to be conducive to safety at intersections. So one thing we were proposing is that a speed study and things be looked at along this corridor. This is really something that we want to take into consideration, because we know that the city has done things like they've installed those permanent markers, the driver feedback signs. I'm sure several of you have seen them out there. They were temporary for a little bit, but they actually found that they worked really well in people realizing how fast they traveled along that road. So they're out there permanently now. They've also done things like included some supplemental traffic signal heads for increased visibility at 6th Avenue and Mitchell Avenue, as well as some pavement markings with some directional arrows at 6th Avenue and 7th Avenue at Colonial Drive and Terrace Street, so people are aware. So we understand that the city's invested some things on 6th and 7th Avenue to really help with visibility and helping people understand that these are, you know, travel at the posted speed limit, slower speeds, not 45 miles per hour. So really looking at what else can be done along these 2 streets to really slow down the vehicles is something we're proposing. Also looking at something similar on Gadsden Street. We heard from a lot of the public that they have a lot of issues with how fast people travel on Gadsden Street. They really exceed the speed limit. So looking at ways that we could reduce the speeds that people travel along that area is a study that we're recommending begin in the next few years. So the next few slides, we're going into a little bit more of the details. These are the things that were shown at the final open house. So what we did was we presented a lot of different options to the public about what could happen along Thomasville Road, starting from Monroe Street all the way up to Benton and Bradford, as well as on Monroe Street. So we gave people a couple options, and one of the recommendations that coming out of here is what we're calling Thomasville Road South. So that is from Monroe Street up to 7th Avenue at the 5 Points intersection. This option was most widely supported by stakeholders and the public. It stays within the existing right-of-way, and what it does is it removes the 10-foot center turn lane along that area. So that space would then be dedicated to both the east and the west side of the corridor for wider sidewalks as well as landscape buffers. So it would bring about probably an 8-foot sidewalk on each side of the road with larger buffers. We have a rendering on the next slide that we can show you. And this was heavily supported by the public when we brought forth several options, as well as one that did keep two left turn lanes in some of the area along the corridor. So in understanding that with this recommendation, there is going to need to be additional traffic and operations analysis to understand how this is going to affect the intersections within this area, because that wasn't fully evaluated in phase 1 of the Midtown Area Transportation Plan. So the next slide, this shows those renderings. So the photos you see on the left are showing what existing is out there. On the right shows what it could be. So as you could see, it's wider sidewalks, wider paths where people could move bidirectionally on bikes as well as on foot, having some more nice landscaping to add that buffer that we heard from a lot of the public they wanted to see, not just grass, but is there a way we could have some plants and, you know, make it feel a little safer for those using the facilities, as well as removing that center turn lane is going to add friction onto the road, so that's going to slow people down as well. So these are the cost estimates that were developed for the project. What we did was we looked at a low estimate as well as a high estimate. We used some DOT. We talked with Blueprint about some projects that they had similar and got some numbers from them. And we came up with about a $2 million low estimate to a high estimate of about $3.5–4 million. Looking at it, which includes undergrounding of utilities in this area. We looked at some of the undergrounding of utilities because we really feel like this space from Monroe Street up to 7th is really the heart of Midtown. It's really this opportunity to make it a place, make it feel like a destination, and undergrounding the utilities really allows for this recommendation to be implemented. So for the north part of Thomasville Road, so this really looks at, I would say, Colonial Drive about up to Benton and Bradford Road. So Colonial Drive is where Thomasville Road starts to expand into a 6-lane corridor, essentially 3 travel lanes, and then you have some left turn lanes. So the recommendation for this area is to reduce 1 travel lane in each direction. So it would be four travel lanes, and then we would keep the existing left turn lanes that are there that allows you to go into the Whole Foods parking lot and the Five Guys parking lot on the other side of the road. That would also allow for shared use paths on both sides of the corridor. Right now, what's existing out there is a lot of inconsistency with the lane widths. The outside lanes are 14 feet, middle lanes are between 11 and 12 feet. It's just, you know, with how Thomasville Road goes from 2 lanes to 6 lanes down to 4 lanes, there's some inconsistency. So really bringing it down and just having 4 travel lanes that are all consistent and probably 11 feet out there, it allows for much wider shared use paths with those buffers out there. And on the next slide, we'll show you what that looks like. So as you can see what's existing, what would be proposed with the removal of those 2 travel lanes in this area. So this one, we also created a cost estimates that you could see on here. We had a high and a low. This project is going to take a lot more coordination. The southern part is as well. These are both really long-term solutions and working with partnerships and working with FDOT, and we have met with FDOT and talked to them about these projects. And just understanding what we heard from the public moving forward. So this project would be about $3.5 million to about $5 million, and that includes undergrounding in this area as well, just to be consistent within this whole project area is what we want to show. But it would allow that shared use path or that more accommodating pedestrian bicycle facility to go all the way from Monroe Street all the way up to Benton and Bradford Road. So that's really a huge piece that connects a lot of different destinations that people really want to connect to. And as I mentioned earlier, we want Midtown to become a place where people can park once and be able to feel comfortable safely walking to all the destinations that are along this area. So Monroe Street is a little bit more difficult because there's not really a lot of...
Question, man. Do you have the noodles?
No noodles here, but with Monroe Street, there's not a chance to change the current configuration of the road. For Thomasville Road, there was in terms of what the existing traffic is out there to remove those extra lanes as well as the turn lanes. Monroe Street, we don't really have that opportunity, and there's really not right of way to be flexible with. So some of the recommendations coming out of Monroe Street would be more looking to modify that center turn lane to accommodate some landscape medians for more of beautification out there. Really trying to figure out opportunities to maybe change the lighting that's out there. And a lot of the recommendations or possibilities, I guess you could say, that could come from Monroe Street is going to be things like redevelopment along this corridor that would accommodate things like larger sidewalks and better landscaping out there. But these are some of the recommendations that we would have moving forward, is having that landscaped median to beautify it a little bit. And now we'll go through some of the supporting projects just quickly that are out there, just to let you know. So there are some short-term pedestrian improvements that are going on out there between, I guess we're done with summer of 2020, but from summer of 2020 to summer of 2021, FDOT is going to go out there and they are going to add RRFB, so rectangular rapid flashing beacons. It's similar to what's out there right now at 5th Avenue next to Whataburger to cross the road there. So they're going to put one south of Calhoun Street at William Street and then south of Beard Street. So there will now be several to allow people to safely cross within that heart of Midtown area. So that's something we'll see within the next, hopefully, 9 months installed out there by DOT. Also, the removal of the northbound outside travel lane along Gadsden Street to accommodate a sidewalk on that east side of Gadsden Street. So Leon County, this was probably a year or so ago, did do a test out there by putting some cones to see if they could remove that travel lane and see if it worked, and it did. So they're looking at putting a sidewalk there. And CRTPA is currently under design for putting a sidewalk on the west side of Gadsden Street to connect 7th Avenue, so currently where the sidewalk ends, up to the entrance into the Brass Tap Orange Theory parking lot right there, where that would connect to those facilities. Further north of there, there's really a lot of right-of-way constraints in the businesses, so we can't bring it, or it's 6th Avenue, so we can't bring it all the way up to 7th Avenue. Removal of the directional sign along Thomasville Road. This is also something that DOT is going to come out and fix within the next couple months, is getting rid of that large sign that's out there that currently is in the middle of the sidewalk and impedes some movement along there. As well as something that the city has recently done is they did put some striped on-street parking along Beard Street between Thomasville and Gadsden Road. So if you've been out there recently, you could see some of that. As well as the midterm recommendations is that Beard Street realignment and pedestrian crossing. So that's something that we would like to see done within the next 5 years to really help with how people move at that intersection, as well as allow for better crossing so people can park and people who live within the Midtown Lafayette Park neighborhood better access Midtown. And then just some additional safety improvements along Thomasville Road. So this study has been completed by FDOT, and this would look at that area from 8th Avenue all the way up to Benton Road. So that's where it really needs to be coordinated with the recommendations that we've made out of this plan. So the next steps, as I mentioned, it's going to be additional traffic analyses for those long-term recommendations along Thomasville Road, just really understanding how it might affect the left turn movements as well as the intersections out there, and then just ongoing coordination with DOT, City of Tallahassee, and Leon County to implement the other recommendations from this project. But it was really incredible thing just to see how many people really wanted to come and participate within this project and really gave us a lot of feedback. That's the reason why the one-weighing idea went out the door very quickly, was we heard right away from businesses and residents it wasn't something they wanted to see. So that's where we had to start to be innovative and think, what else could we do within the existing right-of-way to accommodate what we are hearing from the public in terms of having better connectivity and safety in more of a place. So with that, I am more than happy to answer any questions that y'all may have on this and talk through anything in more detail.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Caitlin, great presentation. Thank you very much. And this is really exciting work. I think many of us went to some of those public meetings that you all had on the Midtown Plan and spoke to a lot of the folks that were there. And so it looks like you incorporated a lot of their feedback, which is great. just one question on the traffic studies for the long-term recommendations for Thomasville. When do you think, what's your best guess on when some of that analysis might come back to us?
I think that might be a question that Greg would better be able to answer.
Yeah, we are, as you probably know, Commissioner Minor, serving on Blueprint. Blueprint in their fiscal year 20, in their 5-year capital budget for fiscal year 2021, has identified, I believe, about $1 million for the next phase of this for design for this project. And so this, subsequent to anticipated approval of this report and this study, further efforts will be initiated to actually move forward with obviously refining what came out of the Midtown Area Transportation Plan. Obviously, it may not look exactly like what we recommended, but I think one thing that can't be denied, as Kate kind of discussed towards, is that the recommendations that really came out of this plan were based on a consensus that was built amongst the public, amongst neighborhood associations, amongst business groups, and really make the best use of the existing footprint of the roadway to better balance the transportation and multimodal options of the corridor and do as well as we can.
Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. All right, Kristen, let it rip.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir, Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. One of the issues in Midtown has, Greg, or whoever can answer this, Caitlin possibly, has been the issue of parking. Was there any discussion with all of these changes that are being proposed? Any discussion on how to accommodate parking in that area?
So parking was not looked at as part of the Midtown Area Transportation Plan. That was something that was really being looked at by the Tallahassee-Leon County Planning Department Midtown Working Group, who we met with several times. But I think a lot of the recommendations that came out of here, similar to what I was saying, is having a better facilities that better connect our pedestrian and bicycle facilities within this area are going to allow for some of that, not alleviate the parking need, but allow people to park once, as well as allow for those who do live in the area to not feel the need to drive to Midtown. Like we kind of talked about the Los Robles neighborhood, they're very isolated in how right now they can't access things, right? So a lot of times some of them will drive with their families because it's safer. So I think with these improvements, there's a possibility that maybe you won't have as many people needing to work there, but that's definitely something that Tallahassee-Leon County was undertaking, was the parking part of Midtown.
Okay. Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, just to follow up on Kate's comments, Commissioner Richardson, we focus more on the corridor itself, and when you think about it, by and large, parking is kind of out of our purview. A lot of the funds that we access, we can't use for parking facilities and things like that, so we rely on the city and or the county and, some of these cases to deal with the parking aspects.
Okay. Yeah, I realize that, Greg, but I just thought that maybe through this plan, there was a comprehensive discussion, not of moving traffic, but also how would you better handle parking?
Right.
And not that we would pay for it, but was it part of the discussion in the transportation plan? And obviously it wasn't.
No, sir, it wasn't.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Next item, I guess, Greg. Thank you, Caitlin.
Mr. Chair?
All right, there we go. Go ahead, Kristen. I know you were there.
Well, I raised my hand.
I didn't see you on the camera. I'm sorry.
No, I meant I raised the virtual hand. I'm not sure what we're... Anyhow, I'll go on. Caitlin, thank you very much. Fantastic presentation, and it really is incredible. Yes, it's taken 3 years, but to look at kind of the funnel of priorities and how we've looked at different scenarios in Midtown, from that long anticipated roundabout getting down to something that is actually workable, that perhaps we could afford, and we engaged all the stakeholders with it. I'll echo what Commissioner Minor said, and I attended, I think one meeting over at, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was a senior center. There's some others, and it is incredible how many people came out for this discussion, so that's great. I also just want to note, as this is right in District 5, really love the example of Los Robles, and I just want to honor how much work you did with the neighborhood. Los Robles is an incredible urban midtown neighborhood, and yet it is landlocked by these really busy streets without any good crosswalks. So I think that was a great example for kind of what our ultimate goal is. So the question I had is actually kind of picking up on where Commissioner Richardson was about the parking. Commissioner Richardson, I know that that's something that may go back a couple of years now from some public meetings that the city held, and the work group has been, my impression is very active. I'm glad we talked with them. But for CRTPA purpose, we do have, and as Caitlin rightly said, we have a lot of partners in this, and the partnerships are going to be critical in order to move all of these various pieces of this plan forward. And so, and part of that gets down to maybe this work helping to look at the parking question from a different angle. If we see the traffic patterns and things like that, we needed something to kind of go first. So I'm hoping rather that this will help unlock some of those other conversations. And Commissioner Richardson, I see you nodding, so I'm glad we would be in agreement on that. So Greg, and this is for Greg Burke, unless you want to toss it over, but I'm wondering if there is a way that we could track the various elements of this plan, looking at the benchmarks blueprint hits, looking at the benchmarks city or county or FDOT and CRTPA might hit. I don't really have much more of a question than that, because I'm not sure if I've seen a plan like this go through the early stages and then get put on paper, maybe like a flow chart or something like that. Not to say everything will be done, but kind of for us to keep track of these different things. And particularly for Leon Tallahassee commissioners, we're going to be making some of those decisions on our other boards, right? So is there a way that y'all have envisioned kind of visualizing that or keeping us informed from these different bodies? I'll leave it there. Any ideas?
I can definitely say that your suggestion or recommendation is a good one, because as Kate discussed and provided some samples, the plan has short, mid, and long term. Some of the short term recommendations are well underway right now and will be completed, like the 3 RFBs that will assist folks crossing Thomasville Road at 3 locations through the heart of Midtown. That's something that we're hoping to see installed, as she said, certainly within the next few months. That's a project that the CRTPA has been working on for a long time. There are other ones also, such as Leon County Public Works, as was discussed, the addition of the sidewalk on the east side of Gadsden from 7th Avenue south to 6th Avenue. That's well underway. And I think definitely it would be important for us, based on all these recommendations, that we maintain a chart or something like a spreadsheet that shows what's being done to actually facilitate all this work that went into this plan that involves, again, as you mentioned, Commissioner Dozier, so many agencies, including City of Tallahassee, Leon County, and obviously Blueprint. So certainly it wasn't something I think that we may have envisioned, or at least I did not, but I like the idea, and I definitely think that's something that we should do.
Well, I appreciate that, Greg, and I'm glad you like it. I don't think you need any other direction from the board. If this is something that you and your partners at Blueprint, at City and County, others can kind of flesh out. And I mentioned that with Blueprint particularly because we're looking at, if I'm not mistaken, 22 million for Midtown placemaking that is programmed, but we haven't yet gotten into those details. I think we were kind of waiting for some of this analysis to come out, right? So if we know at Blueprint what aspects might be handled by others, and we know at CRTPA the same thing, I think that's going to help guide our decisions in the future, right back to what you said, Commissioner Richardson, even those decisions that happen at city and county respectively, and not necessarily in one of our joint boards. So I would love to see that. I could anticipate, not to get too far down in the weeds here, but as Caitlin, you went through the various aspects of the recommendation, undergrounding utilities and sidewalks and all these things, they have to be coordinated, but the funding could come from one place or multiple places, right? So I know that's something you all do quite well among the staff level, but again, I think it would be helpful for us to see how those various projects are progressing. So I'm glad you like the idea. Thank you. That's it, Mr. Chair. I guess I just have to conclude with this. This has been an issue Midtown my entire life in Tallahassee, but particularly since we've seen all the great businesses going in. I think the community is going to be really excited to see this, and I took note of the response to the surveys coming from every single zip code. I'm glad you mentioned that. That's really important too. This is an area that attracts people from all over the county. So thank you very much. Well done.
Thank you. Greg, this is an action item, correct?
Yes, sir. We would be seeking approval of the plan.
I'll move approval. Option 1.
Second.
Curtis, second. Hearing no objections, we'll assume unanimous consent. Greg, next item, please.
Well, actually, Mr. Chairman, if we could, let's do a roll call vote just so we're on the record.
Okay. Commissioner Barfield?
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Allen?
Aye.
Commissioner Merritt?
Aye.
Commissioner Deloge?
Aye.
Commissioner Dozier?
Aye.
Commissioner Maddox?
Aye.
Commissioner Minor?
Aye.
Commissioner Matlow?
Aye.
Commissioner Richardson?
Aye.
And Commissioner Williams Cox. Okay. Unanimously passes.
Greg, that was our only
Sorry, I
action
know we're
item,
doing
correct?
roll call. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Yes, we can hear you.
Was that an aye, Commissioner Williams Cox?
I know she's on the road.
She's on mute.
Yeah.
You can let her affirm later, but you had enough votes to pass the item, Chair.
Thank
Okay,
you. Greg,
thank
that was the only action item, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's move on to item 6C then.
Mr. Chairman, item 6C is an update on the Thomasville Road multi-use trail feasibility study, and Jack Strew is project managing that, so I'm going to pass it on to Jack.
Thanks, Greg. Good afternoon, Commissioner. So as if we haven't talked about Thomasville Road enough today so far, let's talk about Thomasville Road. One of the benefits of the Midtown project that Greg Burke's working on is that it set out a template for us to pursue some of the projects that we have in the bike and ped system, to go out and do a technical review first, come back to you all with that review, go out and do public involvement, come back with that options and present you with that information. So this project is a little bit behind that process because we started it at the beginning of the year. So we're going to move north a little bit from Benton and Bradford all the way up to Maclay Road. And this technical analysis has been interesting in the sense that, we've all been working under different conditions for the last 6 or 7 months, and going out there and doing technical analysis isn't all that difficult, but at the same time, we're trying to be cognizant of the fact that we need to be aware of safety and everything else associated with the pandemic. So we've been out there a couple times with a consultant to take a look at this corridor. It started with, it started a while ago, this project. It began with the Greenways Master Plan, was identified as part of the blueprint process when they took over in that plan. And we've also had this included in the Bike and Pedestrian Master Plan. So we have a whole slew of opportunities in this corridor to take a look at. And we wanted to make sure that we were covering our bases with this initial analysis of the existing inventory and making sure that we're covering our bases with looking at a whole different range of activities that are out there and facilities and infrastructure. So with that, I think I will turn it over to John Sewell because he knows way more than I do about this. So I'll turn it over to him.
All right, can you all hear me now?
I hear about 3 of you.
Yeah, I hear that feedback, and I'm not sure what's going on. Let's see here.
It is Halloween, but...
All right. Let's see if I can... Can you all hear me?
Much better.
Can you see the screen? Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. I'll go ahead and get started here then. Thank you very much and good afternoon. My name's John Sewell and I'm with Kinley Horn, and I'm going to step you through the Thomasville Road Multi-Use Path Feasibility Study. In essence, this really kind of follows on from what Kate just presented regarding Midtown. You'll notice that the project logo for this project basically terms it Midtown to Market. So with that in mind, I'll kind of walk you through the presentation. This project is basically a technical analysis. We have not yet done any robust public involvement. We've had some stakeholder interaction, but the public involvement phase of this will follow. This project, as a reminder, was an initial pilot project from the Tallahassee-Leon County Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan. And so we're looking at this to see if a 12-foot wide asphalt multi-use path could be constructed along the Thomasville corridor from Benton Road up to the Market District in Tallahassee. One of the things that we learned as a part of the Bicycle Pedestrian Master Plan was that, you know, we could patch together connections from Benton up to Market. However, it was going to be very convoluted from the perspective of, you know, we wouldn't have a direct connection from one place to the other. And so we looked at Thomasville Road and we said to ourselves, you know, there are partial facilities out there. There sure are a lot of people who live along this corridor. As you can see on this aerial, just thousands of people directly connected to Thomasville Road. So this project was identified as a major project as a part of this early initiative coming out of the master plan. And so this project is to analyze to see if it's actually feasible to build this. So with that in mind, we have several project goals. Obviously, we want to maintain safety. We want to provide accessibility to all of those residences and businesses along the corridor. We want to just make sure that we're providing the best network connectivity in the study area. We also want to make sure that we can design a facility that's going to be used by people and enjoyed by people. It is a very noisy corridor, and so that's something that we'll have to kind of keep in mind. We want to be equitable and make sure that we're joining folks, aging populations, low-income areas as they're applicable. And we want to make sure that we're being multimodal and we're providing health and recreation benefits. So our project approach, we kind of broke this down into two parts. The first part is looking at connecting it from Benton Road up to Metropolitan, and then from Metropolitan into the market area. And I'm going to take these one at a time to just better understand the areas. There's different needs in the corridors, so we're going to step through these one at a time. But first, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the activities. I said this is a technical analysis and not necessarily with full public involvement as yet. We've done a lot of site reconnaissance. Both planners and engineers have been out there to look at the corridor. We assessed right-of-way, sidewalk locations and condition. We looked at the existing bicycle facilities and pedestrian facilities. We looked at all the intersections from the standpoint of, are they residential access points? Are they public streets? Are they business locations? We even have a firehouse out there, so we had to look at all those different aspects of those crossing facilities. We wanted to also kind of look at this from a parks and recreation perspective. One of the things that this corridor would do is actually connect as many as 6 to 8 parks, existing parks, and connect them, which is not currently the condition out there. And then look at schools, and we also performed a preliminary tree assessment, since I'm sure a lot of you know that there are a lot of mature oaks out there, and folks are generally very pay attention to that and appreciate that. So we've kind of done all of that. We've identified the opportunities and challenges for this corridor, and we've developed a set of guiding principles for design. Things like, we understand that there's topography out there, and so we're going to have to design these intersections with that in mind. And we also met with the implementation arm of the master plan, which is our bicycle pedestrian working group, to get input along the way. So kind of this part one section from Benton up to Metropolitan. It's a 4-lane road. We've got landscaped medians out there and turn lanes. There's 4 major intersections that would have to be dealt with. And there's a 45-mile-an-hour speed limit out there. On the west side on the east side of the road, there's an ADA compliant sidewalk that a lot of people use on a daily basis. We've seen everything out there from kids on bikes to joggers, and we've seen folks doing all of those things at one time. It gets a lot of use. On the west side of the corridor, there is a non-ADA compliant, we'll call it a sidewalk. I think that's what it was intended to be, but it's basically asphalt that does not meet any current standard. There's also intermittent 7-foot on-street designated bike lanes north of Waverly Road. This is discontinuous throughout the corridor, and those were installed a few years back just because the outer lanes were wide enough to do so. And there's transit stops along the corridor as well. So I mentioned the parks. This is the list of parks that are directly connected to this segment. But you've got Dorothy Oven Park, McCord, Waverly, and the Goose Pond Trail that connects over to Hermitage Boulevard. We're looking at things like the positive user experience. For those of you who have used the coastal trail down on 98 in McCulloch County, you know that there is a pretty significant effort put in towards keeping the trail off of 98 as much as possible. That would be the goal here as well. We'd like to keep this landscaped and buffered from the road as much as possible. There's also some complementary projects that I'll talk about later that kind of merge in with this project. And then we also have these other existing facility connections. We want to connect to Hermitage, the designated bike lanes there, Metropolitan, bike lanes there, and then the Goose Pond Trail. We have a great connection to that as part of this preliminary plan. We'll also look at safety improvements along the corridor in several different locations, and we'll look at signalized intersections where a crossing could occur where we need it to. There are some right-of-way constraints in the corridor, but nothing that we can't deal with in terms of this being feasible. We have met with city staff to talk about the trees and the conditions of those. We've got some utility poles, and we've got a lot of privately owned properties out there that abut up to this corridor, and some businesses. In addition to that, there's also some retaining walls. We'll have to deal with mailboxes like we do on any project like this, and then just deal with driveways and neighborhood entrances in a safe manner. So, you know, just some of the conditions of the existing facilities out there. Bike lanes are, like I said, intermittent. There's a lot of noise in the corridor, so we'll have to address that. And a few other areas where a buffer would be nice, but it's going to be pretty difficult to provide that. So I'd like to talk a little bit about these complementary projects. One of them is the McCord Pond Drainage Ditch Improvements. This area is actually just north of Benton Road. There's a drainage corridor that goes through there, and this is actually being used by people today. You'd never know it, but this is directly adjacent to Thomasville Road. So in the southern section of this corridor, we could actually utilize this right-of-way and have this path go between the existing neighborhoods that are on Thomasville Road and the neighborhoods behind it. And you can see that the goat path is pretty worn out. Now, we saw everything from little kids on bikes to joggers, elderly folks out for a walk. We saw everything in between back here. This is a very highly used trail that connects directly into McCord Park. So this project is actually a stormwater drainage project that's currently under design. Construction's anticipated to start in 21, which would culvert a lot of the drainage ditch. And we could potentially locate the multi-use path on top of that and in this corridor right here that you're looking at. Another one of the complementary projects is the project that you just received a presentation on that Kate walked you through, which is the Midtown Area Transportation Plan. So this would actually join with this multi-use path in Benton, at Benton Road, and then continue further to the north. So it makes a lot of sense. In essence, what we're doing here is we're connecting all the way down to Cascades Park and all the way up to the Market District and to Killearn, which I'll show you here in a minute. I'd like to walk you through the second part now, which is Metropolitan Boulevard to Maclay Boulevard, which is the Market District. So this connection, you know, one of the questions that folks might ask is, well, if we're on Thomasville Road, why wouldn't we just use the existing bike lanes that are on Thomasville Road through the I-10 interchange area and then up into Market? Well, those lanes actually could be used by a proficient cyclist that feels comfortable in that type of an environment. So your most proficient cyclist, you know, we have our 4 categories of cyclists, that would probably appeal to maybe one of them. Our goal here, remember, is that we want to connect the everyday cyclists, the everyday bicyclists, and joggers and rollerbladers and so on from Midtown up to Market. To do that, we would need a separated path that would go off of that Thomasville Road area because there's not enough right-of-way in that section by the I-10 interchange. So we would look at making this connection via a variety of different corridors. I'm not going to step you through all of these, but it would include things like Metropolitan Boulevard, possibly Live Oak Plantation Road, Timberlane School Road, Timberlane Road, Martinhurst Road, Maclay Commerce Road, and Maclay Boulevard. And we've analyzed all of the existing conditions with these facilities. So a multi-use path throughout this corridor has been deemed to be constructible and feasible. and this would allow for more user types to continue to use the facility. It would also provide a better positive user experience as opposed to those going through the busy traffic on Thomasville Road. It would provide better network connectivity, and it would be complemented by some of these other projects. And in some of these challenges I've already stepped you through, but right away the elevation and grade changes that would have to be addressed, and then possibly some potential neighborhood opposition, and just allowable uses associated with easements. We have a couple of easements in the study area that we'll have to coordinate on. So I mentioned a complementary project. This is a project in the Market District that Blueprint and the City of Tallahassee is embarking on right now. This actually had some public outreach completed for it. It included a preliminary engineering phase and conducting public engagement. It includes some roadway improvements, and we would connect through this area.
Mr. Chairman?
Hello?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
I'm just breaking. It sounded like
Mr. Chairman, I'm not hearing anything.
Greg, can you hear me?
I can hear both John and Randy.
Yeah, we can hear you both on this, and I think Commissioner Richardson might be trying to ask a question. I'm not sure.
Curtis? I'll go ahead and continue. Maybe we'll take questions at the end.
Hold on a second, John. Commissioner Richardson, can you hear me? We just lost him, I believe.
Okay.
John,
continue on?
Sure.
All right. Yeah, and this slide just basically shows how Thomasville Road fits into this larger regional connection. And it's one of 3 projects that are currently underway for feasibility, including the US 90 corridor and the Lake Jackson corridor. This slide shows you the very important connectivity of Thomasville Road throughout the network. All of these other dashed lines are other routes that were identified in the bicycle and pedestrian master plan. And you can see that Thomasville Road is a vital connection through this area. So it's very important. And it does, as I said, it mentioned earlier, it connects from the Market District down to Midtown into other areas in the network. So just kind of some of the next steps. I talked about this public engagement outreach that will begin soon this fall. We'll be holding additional stakeholder meetings. We'll coordinate with the local neighborhood associations to get input and opinions and buy-in. And we will organize engagement opportunities virtually, in person, or however we can conduct that. And we will ask for their feedback and input into the process so that we can make sure that the feasible alternatives are based on not only the technical analysis, but from the public here in Tallahassee. So with that, I'd be glad to take any questions that you have at this time.
Curtis, are you there?
I made it back. I don't know what happened, but...
Okay. What was your question, Curtis?
Oh, I didn't have I couldn't hear.
Oh.
Yeah, for some reason I lost the last part of the presentation. I had to get off and come back.
Gotcha. Okay, are there any questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Great presentation, John. Thank you very much. On the public input that you're going to be starting, will you please let us know when and where and how those meetings will take place, whether they're virtual or in person? We can help you get the word out on those. Part 1 of the multi-use path is in my district, and very well familiar with it. Very familiar with McCord Park. That's a very popular park.
Yes, it is.
The things you're talking about with the culvert to fix to address the drainage, I think is going to be very well received.
Okay.
And on that same stretch from Benton to Metropolitan, I mean, there there are at least 3 schools along that stretch of Thomasville. So this is likely to be a very popular project. So if you can let us know when you're doing the public input, we will definitely help you get the word out.
We will absolutely do that, and the details of that are being finalized right now. And you mentioned those schools. I'm glad you did. On that path that I showed you earlier, there actually are gates and fences along this corridor right here that back up to all those schools. So it was kind of interesting. You can literally look over the back fence of those schools from this corridor right here.
Yeah, I've walked that goat trail quite a bit myself. It's nice. It's not the most appealing because as you stated, but with the improvements you're talking about, I think people are going to be very, very receptive to it. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir. I can't see raised hands, but Kristen, I'm sure yours is raised. So go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually don't have a question. John, I think this is a great presentation. And since the chair gave me the opportunity, I'll just say to Greg Burke and Greg Slay and Jack, I suppose, I think this is another example of a project that could really use that kind of flow chart to map out who's doing what aspect. I know we're on an earlier stage than we are with Midtown, what we just talked about, but I also have walked that goat trail a good bit, although I've never seen Commissioner Minor out there at Record Park. But I think a lot of people actually discovered it in the last 6-7 months as they were staying home, and my sense is it's gotten a lot more traction. No pun intended there, but a lot more use. So I do think the improvements are going to be welcome, but if there is a way to map out the blueprint piece of this, the city, county, CRTAPA piece of this going forward, that will help us with future decisions. So thank you very much. I'm excited about this.
Are there any other questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Just very quickly, the city is looking at a bicycle park in the Market Square district. Will this connect to that bicycle park?
So this slide right here, this is the park where I believe that bicycle park is proposed, Commissioner?
Yes.
And yes, so basically our project would connect in this southern leg right here on Martinhurst Road.
Okay.
And then we would cross probably right about here on, I don't know if you can see my cursor. It will connect here and then connect to this trail, and then their trail is actually going to connect up to this point on Maclay Boulevard.
Okay.
And then we have a trail that actually goes along the west side of Maclay and connects all the way up to Maclay Road, where there are existing facilities today, and there's also a planned sidewalk on Maclay Road as well. So there's a lot going on in this area, and it's all been well coordinated, we believe, to provide really good network connectivity through this area.
All right, great. Thank you, John. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman, if I could real quick, to go back to Commissioner Minor's question regarding public involvement, as John said, we're still kind of working out some of the details on that. More than likely, we wouldn't be looking at any open public meetings, whichever format they're in, till after the first of the year, just to give everybody kind of a timeline. So probably after the first of the year before we actually do any active public participation in that respect.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Item 6D, Greg.
Mr. Chairman, this is similar to Thomasville Road, an update on the US 90 feasibility study, and Mr. Burke is managing that one, so I'm going to turn it back to him.
Okay, great. Thanks, Greg. The US 90 feasibility study evaluates the feasibility of constructing a multi-use trail on US 90 between Monticello and Tallahassee, a distance of almost 30 miles, so it's a long project. That said, I'm going to turn it over to Kate Widnes again with Kimley Horn.
All right, I'm back again. This one is a project that we are just starting very similar to Thomasville Road. So this one is along US 90. Now, this project actually starts over in Tallahassee. The project limits for this are Pedrick Road, that's the western limit over in Tallahassee, and we're moving all the way over to where the existing Monticello bike trail is, which is in the city of Monticello. So this is a significantly long trail, over 20 miles, really a lot of regional connectivity. So what we've been doing has actually been similar to Midtown as well as Thomasville that just John talked about, is looking at what is feasible out there. Is this project actually feasible in getting constructed? Is it safe? You know, what's the right of way out there? What are some challenges? What are the opportunities? And that's what we've been working on this past year, is gathering all of that information with a phase 2 that we're kicking off this fall, to bring it out to the public. So similar to what Greg Slade just commented on, is probably for the rest of 2020, what engagement might occur would be things like meeting with additional stakeholders, with any public meetings coming in 2021. So with that, the project goals is really to provide this safe, continuous facility between Tallahassee and Monticello. So this project is identified on Sun Trails, which is shared use, non-motorized trails. It's a project between FDOT as well as FDEP for building this regional trail network. So this is one of those projects that's identified as part of that network and connects Tallahassee, our capital, to, you know, downtown, beautiful, historic Monticello. We want to allow for new alternative transportation opportunities for the residents that live on both sides of this project, as well as the business and visitors within this area, to really attract people to this project, and that's going to help spur economic development and activity. So the longer the trails that are constructed, that attracts people not locally, not from the state, but nationally, right? So this project connecting into Tallahassee, you have the existing trail in Monticello that's being under PD&E right now to be extended. There's just a lot of opportunity for growth. You know, this project coming into Tallahassee, you have everything that's occurring from Cascades Park to FAMU Way to the St. Mark's Trail down to the Coastal Trail. So you really do have this regional network that we're now expanding into 3 counties. So that is a lot of opportunity to bring a lot of people to our area for this type of recreational activity. So for this project, we have done some limited stakeholder engagement. We did meet with FDEP just from an understanding to let them know that we were looking at this project. We also met with the Hilltop Country Store owners. Not sure how many people have stopped out there. It's a pretty popular spot to grab lunch or, you know, pick up something you might need in between Tallahassee and Monticello. But we've met with them several times because their property poses some challenges in terms of safety for trail users. So we wanted to definitely engage them during the feasibility side of the project. We also met with the property owner across the street as well, just to have an understanding of what our opportunities were in this area where there are some constraints. As well as we did a presentation to the Jefferson County BOCC, just to make them aware that we were looking at the feasibility of this study, and, you know, there was nothing but support from their end and understanding that what we were doing at this point was collecting data and that we would come back out to them as well as to the public. So the existing conditions out there is kind of looking from Pedrick moving east. It's 4-lane bidirectional road with a median. So that goes from Pedrick to Summit Lake Drive. Then it starts to shift into a 2-lane bidirectional with a paved shoulder, which goes from Summit Lake Drive all the way over to the Monticello Courthouse. Speed limits vary between 35 miles per hour and 55, with a majority of the corridor within that 55 miles per hour. It's pretty high speed most of the way along this area. And then the existing bicycle and pedestrian facilities, there are sidewalks from Pedrick to kind of where the I-10 interchange is right now, as well as sidewalks that begin once you get into Monticello. and there are some designated on-street bike lanes from Pedrick to east of Summit Lake Drive. So there are limited facilities out there, but like I said, this is a very long corridor, and the majority of it does not have any designated bicycle and pedestrian facilities. But as you can see on the photo on the screen, there is a paved shoulder, and we do, every time we've been out there for a site visit, sure enough, we always see somebody riding along that paved shoulder, so we know it's pretty heavily used right now. So that brings us to the opportunities for this project. It really is a beautiful corridor that's out there. There's a lot of shade. There is where there is available right-of-way, that right-of-way is absolutely beautiful. It can be well separated from the corridor. You go behind some great mature trees along that area, and that's ideal, especially for cyclists traveling along long distances. Aesthetically, it's really unique for North Florida. The topography that's out there, it's just really different, making it a really big attractor for people wanting to come and use this facility. As well as what I just mentioned, it is an existing bicycle route. A lot of long distance riders currently use it out there, and we see a lot of people, like I said, every time we've been out there using the paved shoulders. I think if you talk to a lot of cycling groups, they're using this on their weekend rides all the time to connect down to Monticello. So some of the challenges out there, and I'll just note that the challenges aren't things that are going to stop this project or not make it feasible. These are just things that we know we really need to just address and have some conversations about and make sure that we're incorporating that into this project as it moves forward. So some of those things are, there are some areas where right-of-way is constrained, and those are the conversations that we're having with some of the businesses, as well as opportunities to maybe keep the path on both sides of the road. So would we have to switch over in order to avoid some right-of-way constraints? That talks a little bit into the trail crossings and some safety issues that we would need to address with that, as well as the crepe myrtle trees that are out there. They are beloved by many people. They're beautiful when they're out there blooming. So really just understanding what a historic and meaningful tree that is to people of Monticello, people who travel along the US 90 corridor, and having respect for that out there as we're trying to find where this project would be most feasible. So these are kind of some of the study area issues that we are addressing in the feasibility. These areas include things like the I-10 interchange. Currently on both the north and the south side of the road, there are four I think three on and off ramp and entry exits from I-10, which are pretty high speed. People head on to I-10 pretty fast. They get off of I-10 pretty fast, and that doesn't make it conducive to have a trail right there. So we're looking at ways that maybe that interchange could be modified to accommodate a more safe interaction between if there were trail users out there. There are also some areas like east of Hawks Landing Drive and east of Baum Road where you do have that limited right-of-way. So those are areas where maybe we have to look at switching the trail of being on one side of the road to the other side of the road. We have some businesses as well along the area, such as Rick's Repair Shop and the Hilltop Country Store. Just understanding access management and making sure that we're working with those businesses to make sure that they still have their driveway and everyone can keep moving as they are, but if the trail is adjacent to that, that trail users are also safe within this. Lake Muckasucky's out there on the north side. There's that beautiful boardwalk. A lot of people stop and go fishing out there, take pictures. It's absolutely beautiful. So just understanding in that area that that boardwalk isn't conducive to having different modes of bicyclists and pedestrians out there. So we would have to definitely look at the south side of the corridor and address some wetlands within that area. And then moving into downtown Monticello, there's very limited right-of-way. You have the Crepe Myrtles, you have a lot of historic homes, but fortunately there are existing sidewalks, there are paved shoulders out there, so there are definitely solutions to safely get people into Monticello, because that's ultimately the goal, is to get people into Monticello and get people over to Tallahassee to really bridge that regional connectivity with this project. So what I'm going to go through now are some opportunities that we've identified during this feasibility study. These are not the final opportunities by any means. These are things that we're going to bring forth during the public engagement process to hear back from the public and really understand with them what they would like to see. Are there things maybe we didn't know about out there? So these will definitely probably be refined as we go into the public engagement. So we're just calling these opportunities, and there's 3 of them out there. So the first one we have really is on both the north and the south side of the corridor. So you could see that in the blue on the map. That's where we switch to the north side of the corridor. So this opportunity would require 2 crossings ultimately, and that would help avoid some of the right-of-way issues that we have out there. Some of the study area issues we could talk about shortly, but that looks at things like the I-10 interchange, which would be on the south side of the road there, east of Hawks Landing Road, as well as the Hilltop Country Store in Lake Miccosukee. So those aren't, like I said, challenges, but making sure that we have to address those areas in terms of wetlands and working with the businesses out there. And on this slide, you can kind of see a summary of those things that we're seeing as challenges, but they don't stop the project by any means, as well as opportunities. Is 2 crossings along over 20 miles of trails is a pretty limited number of crossings, and there probably wouldn't have to be any right-of-way that would need to be acquired for that, because we would stay in areas where there is ample amount of right-of-way in order to construct a 10 to 12-foot multi-use path. In some areas where it's maybe a little bit more constrained, we would go down to 8 feet. So opportunity 2, this one's a little unique in that we would leave US 90, but we would be able to stay on the south side of the corridor the entire time. So once you get over to Wadesboro Road off of US 90, we would utilize Wadesboro Road along with Baum Road and Jefferson Road to go back into some of those neighborhoods. That allows us to avoid the right-of-way issue, get on some roads that are a little bit lower speed, and look for opportunities out there. And that would limit having to have any crossings along US 90 for this opportunity. So some of the challenges still out there are the I-10 interchange, the Creighton Myrtles. There are a few right-of-way constraints, like I said, where maybe we would have to reduce the width of the trail. But the opportunities is we wouldn't have to cross at all, which is a really big safety win. Wouldn't need to acquire any right-of-way likely, and it would utilize those low-volume roads and maybe even connect to some of the folks that live out there along the US 90 corridor for them to easily access this trail. And opportunity 3 that we have, this is one where we would have the trail move to the north side of the road, looking at around Hawks Landing, and we would actually continue that all the way over to Old Magnolia Road and Gamble Road. So we would avoid the Hilltop Country Store, and we would be on the north side of that to avoid having to deal with any possible access management issues at that businesses, or coordinating how the safety of the trail would work with that existing driveway that they have out there. So this one would be on the northern side, longer than opportunity 1, but it would still only have 2 crossings along US 90. And these are similar within their challenges and their opportunities. Of I-10 is still a challenge. The Creighton Myrtles, understanding that there are some areas where the right-of-way does get tighter, and there aren't any really pedestrian crossings that are currently out there right now, so we would have to look at the intersections and just make sure that where we were crossing, we were doing it in a safe way, and doing an intersection analysis of what can be done to make sure that it would be safe. And then the opportunities would be still a limited number of crossings and no right-of-way acquisition likely. So what's next with this is really finalizing a feasibility report with alternatives. We're not going to do that until after the public outreach, because as I stated, these opportunities we looked at, these were just things that helped us identify it as we were going through the feasibility phase of what could be done along this corridor. So when we reach out to the public, they're going to be able to provide us with some more insight, let us know what they would or would not like to see along the corridor. So those opportunities will be evaluated, and then from that we're hoping to have a preferred alternative by the public that would move forward. And then there's possibilities to apply for things like Centrail's funding, because this is a priority project on the Centrail's network for next phases, such as PD&E and design and construction. So those are really some of the next phases after we finalize this feasibility and move into the public engagement. And with that, as I mentioned earlier, it's going to be a lot of stakeholder engagement, so with property owners and businesses, as well as the public meetings that will be out there. And we'll coordinate with different neighborhood associations just to make sure we're really getting the word out and having as many people participate. But with the meeting with the Board of County Commissioners, as well as we have discussed things with City of Monticello, they're really encouraging with helping to get the word out and hopefully having a lot of people participate during this process when we kick it off early in the new year. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you guys might have on this particular project.
Okay, any questions? Thank you, Caitlin.
Great, easy peasy. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, Greg?
Mr. Chairman, up next is the DOT report. I believe Brian is on the line, but I haven't spoken to him. So, Brian, I'll open it up to you.
Thank you, Greg. I just want to put a real quick plug in for our Orange Avenue PD&E public meeting. This will be the alternatives public meeting. It will be a virtual format. The comment period will open Friday, August 30th. The website where the information will be located is the department's road site. It's nwflroads.com. And on Friday, the October 30th, we will send out an announcement to all of the elected officials, stakeholders, and agencies in the area to notify them of this opportunity. With that, that concludes the department's update.
Brian, real quick, I believe you said August 30th, but you meant October 30th.
October 30th, excuse me.
Okay. Yeah, I saw a few puzzled looks when you said that. So.
And Brian, they got our speed limit sign fixed out here. I appreciate that.
Okay, glad they could get to it.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, up next is my report. I just have a couple of things. I wanted to note that we sent out an update added some correspondence under item 9C last Tuesday, and apparently the update notice did not go out to you, but that was in regards to a memo generated by council regarding conflicts with the MCORS project. So if you just have a chance to take a look at that and have any questions, let us know. As it stands now, we are anticipating having our November meeting in person, unless the governor changes his mind again. So we are working with the city. We'll plan on having it in the commission chambers, and we're working with them to set up social distancing protocols and all that good stuff. So we'll let you know. May send out a note or something a few days before exactly how we're going to do it. They're still working out some of the logistics on their end. And I wanted to touch on the fact that we are contemplating, we wouldn't do it for this year, but possibly next year, developing a hybrid meeting format. We're thinking that might allow us more public involvement for these things. You know, we'd still have to do it, per state statute as far as in-person quorums for the board members. But we think that might add some opportunities for the public to be more involved in the meetings themselves. So I don't think we could work out any logistics for the November meeting. That is something we're going to be taking a look at for the next year. And Mr. Chairman, that's all I had.
Okay. Is there any other items on the agenda?
Mr. Chair?
Chair? Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to ask Greg a question on the last point he made. I love the idea of developing a hybrid meeting format, particularly if that helps folks from Jefferson, Wakulla, Gadsden, who may not be able to attend the meeting, watch the meeting, but also, make their comments. And that's really my question. You're talking about how citizens could get their 3 minutes in a virtual format as well as in person?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I love it. Thank you very much.
Curtis, did you have something?
Mr. Chair?
Yes. Jerry.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, no, I had a question on 9C. This struck me as pretty unusual to see, and left me feeling a little bit uncomfortable, especially, seeing, a board member who is being hired to run interference with local governments, and we're going to likely discuss some of these, and we already have, and this is kind of the first time I'm learning of what the relationship with Atkins is. And looking back a couple months ago when we had a conversation about the MCORS project, and Commissioner Deloge advocated, not to make a decision right away, and I'm just wondering, where we're going to draw the line. How do we know? Is it only going to be on the vote? Is it going to be advocating for decisions or trying to sway the conversation? And Mr. Attorney, you may be able to weigh in more on what's appropriate, but it just really left me feeling wholly uncomfortable not knowing that ahead of time.
Commissioner, when Commissioner Deloge and I discussed it, an issue came up about how he should recuse himself. What I've recommended right now and what he's agreed to now is that if the issue comes up before, and let me back up for a second, make sure the foundation is in place. Presently, there is no alignment that impacts the CRTPA. So the CRTPA does not have a formal policy role to make as it relates to the MCOR alignment. But the legislation stated that each MPO, which the CRTPA is, would select a person to be a representative on the MCOR in their quarter. So Kristen Dozier, as a commissioner, is our representative on the MCORs. Now, one of the things that has not come up is there has not been any formal decision making done by the CRTPA as it relates to the MCORs. There's been some discussion, but what I've recommended to Commissioner Deloge is that if any issues come up in the future, he should announce the conflict. And he's asked me, and Greg Slay and I've looked at the secondary issue, which is once he announces a conflict, should he discuss the item? My preliminary position on that is that he should not discuss the item. Greg wants me to look at that a little bit closer, and I'm looking at that. But right now, Commissioner Deloge is in agreement with that recommendation. So if an issue comes up before the CRTPA, as it presently stands, each time it comes up involving the MCORs, he will announce that he has a conflict and he will not discuss the item. In my opinion, what I stated was that we should revisit this issue if there's actually any policy decision-making that would occur with the CRTPA as it relates to the MCORs. So right now you have a bright line between the MCOR alignment selection and the CRTPA's role. In other words, there's no actual policy considerations being generated by the CRTPA.
Okay. So, and in his role in that position, is he able to lobby CRTPA board members, or should he just refrain from that completely?
It's implicit that the board members, the commissioners that he would lobby is where the alignment was. So I did not address that issue, but I would, if I had to opine, I would say he would not lobby county commissioners, city commissioners, or anyone that was on the CRTPA board. But that issue is not before you because there's no alignment that affects the Leon County area. So I didn't actually address that issue because it wasn't the one that was actually, that should generate a question.
I understand. And Greg, I think we may have talked about it at Slay last year, maybe about just a registration for lobbyists for CRTPA. Currently, at the city and the county, you can register, but there's not really a process to submit a registration to lobby CRTPA. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. And by and large, I think when we talked last year, we rarely, if ever, get any lobbying contacts. But again, if that's something that you want to put on a future agenda, yeah, we could put something up and have the board make that discussion. But that would need to be policy direction from the board.
Sure. Yeah, and that's something I would support just for full transparency. So it could be public record anytime somebody does intend to lobby the board. Thank you.
Chair, one point.
Sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm trying, I have a quick question of understanding here for a second. Has the issue come up with this? Because we all serve on different boards. I'm pretty sure that Commissioner Deloge has had a conversation with the attorney about his potential conflicts. I think we all know how to handle conflicts. I'm wondering if I missed something in that there's been an issue that has happened. Did I miss anything there, Thornton or Greg?
No, you didn't. This is done in an abundance of caution. If you recall, there was a meeting where Commissioner Deloge disclosed that he was possibly going to work for or was working for Atkins. and he wanted to make sure there was no conflict. He laid out for us what I put in the memo, which he provided to me. I restated that in the opinion, and it's what I stated earlier. He reached out to me and wanted to make sure that my opinion was still valid. I told him that I felt more comfortable giving him a written document that would outline how I saw the issues. And so that's how this came about. This is more of an abundance of caution because, as you all know, I'm going to call it like I see it. And so when he and I discussed it, I explained to him that this is what I thought the law was in this issue. There was a bright line between the alignment for the MCORs and the role of the CRTPA. And so I outlined that for you. But this is Commissioner Deloge wanted to make sure that it was clear that there was no conflict. So there was no issue that came up, to answer your question.
Thank you, Gordon. I've just personally, we've always allowed our individual commissioners to handle their conflicts by themselves. I've never been a part of a conversation where we've asked the attorney about a specific commissioner's conflict. So I thought maybe I had missed something, but it's good to know that Commissioner Deloge has reached out to you with what potential conflicts and handled it that way. This was different to me, and I just wanted to make sure that again that I didn't miss anything, because this is just different than what we've handled things in the past, where when we've had conflicts, commissioners have stated their conflicts or talked to the attorney prior to the meeting, or the attorney has said whether or not the conflict was there, and we went forward. So I just want to make sure that I didn't miss anything. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Thornton, for answering my question.
And just let me follow up. It is different, but Commissioner, because of the high profile of this project, MCORs, I think it was the better approach. Commissioner Deloge reached out to me and wanted to get my opinion on it. So I thought it was appropriate to go ahead and document that to make sure it was clear there was no conflict.
Mr. Chair, can I weigh in on this real quick?
Sure.
Just to clarify, before I ever entered into any kind of relationship, I talked to not only Thornton, but I also talked to Herb at the county and said, I want to be abundantly clear. And in both cases, they said no, for all the reasons Thornton just gave. So I just circled back and said, can I memorialize that so that I make sure if I'm not here to speak for myself and everybody goes, well, or Thornton's not here or Herb is out the door. So this, for me, was kind of a formality after the fact, but this was done well in advance of me ever even considering this. So.
Okay. Anybody else? Kristen?
Mr. Chair, yeah. So I appreciate, and Commissioner Deloge, you have disclosed this not just at CRTPA, but also at the County Commission meeting. I think perhaps before you were, or at sometime around when you're joining CRTPA. I'll put it that way. I don't know when, but I was made aware of this a couple times. So sure, it is typical that we identify our own conflicts if an issue comes up. Thornton, I really do appreciate you memorializing this, whether you added the memo to the agenda or had it just for your own information. And Mr. Deloge, you asked for this. I think that is a good idea, particularly in something that's high profile. I'm going to say that I actually came to this a little late. Greg mentioned that for the county who download a PDF versus going through board docs, we actually downloaded the PDF before this item was added, and because there wasn't a notice, just kind of missed it until today, and I was notified that there was a change in the agenda. So I really appreciate you saying that, Greg. It happens here, it happens Blueprint, it happens other places, so that's not extraordinary. But I think that is just a good reminder to us. So, Thornton, I may have had the opportunity to ask you a couple questions before the meeting, and instead I'm going to ask them here, and that is,
Kristen, I'm sorry. Before we get to the questions, I told Greg previously I have a meeting, I have to leave, so I'll let y'all work this out on your own. So we'll see you next meeting.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Matlow, that makes you chair now, so we can pass the gavel to you.
Absolutely. Commissioner Dozier.
Thank you. All right, so Mr. Williams, the way you described Leon County or CRTPA in the memo about MCORs, because this is now on the record, I'm asking this question just to make sure we've got the right perspective on this. And something you said in response to Commissioner Maddox's question, that there is a bright line between the role of MCORs and CRTPA, that resonates with me. In fact, I will be on my last task force meeting tomorrow, having done amendments for MCORs last week, and I've served for over a year. So there is a bright line between the role of the task force and what CRTPA, our role is in appointing one member to the task force. However, your perspective deals with sunshine rules within CRTPA and ethics rules within CRTPA, right? And with that, I'm not sure it matters whether or not Leon County is part of the corridor. It matters that Jefferson County is part of the corridor, and that is part of our MPO. I'm also not sure, and maybe Greg Slay could speak to this, but I thought only MPOs that were touched by the corridor assigned people to the task force. We don't have the MPO from West Florida, for example. So I wouldn't necessarily have been asking any of these questions had the memo not been on the agenda. And so I don't want to, get too far in the weeds, but now that it's there, I think we need to be clear about what we're looking at here. So could you, if that makes sense, could you speak to the MPO issue or CRTPA versus just Leon?
It does, and we can make it even more narrow. The issue really is, are the any decisions that you're making as a task force member, are they policy decisions of the CRTPA? And my memory is that they're not. You're actively in that role as a task member. So the CRTPA is not expressing any policy considerations as you sit on that task board for the MCORs. So that's the bright line for me. So you're correct, Jefferson County's there, but that's not even relevant. The relevant issue is, are you getting direction from the CRTPA on how you're making your decision? And the bright line, as I understand, is that you're not. And so what we discussed was that if you were to come back to the CRTPA, and you are correct that my legal opinion goes to the CRTPA, that then Commissioner Deloge would have to disclose that he had a conflict, and he accepted my recommendation that he would not discuss the item because he expressed a conflict. And so that's the bright line. You're on that task force, but you're not coming back to the CRTPA for guidance on how to make your policy decisions, as I recall.
You are right about that. I just want to be really clear that it's not because Leon isn't part of the corridor.
Correct.
The corridor could change. Things could happen in the future. This is guiding principles. It is because CRTPA has a member county.
Correct.
And Greg Slay, was I right? Only MPOs that are touched by this corridor are included on the task force, and we don't have someone from West Florida. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. The only MPOs that are included were ones that had, some portion of their planning area within the study area of the Suncoast Parkway.
And we could have appointed our Jefferson County member, but Commissioner Barfield was already a member of the task force, so it fell to me. So we do have a ad hoc member, Chris Rito, who is also on the task force. So I just want to make sure that our language in describing this is correct. And then I guess the other two quick things I'll say, Mr. Chair, since you were the one who raised some questions about this, I'll toss it back over to you. One, I really do appreciate Commissioner Deloge, you accepting Mr. Williams' recommendation not to discuss things if you have to state that conflict in the future. That's Leon County policy. My understanding is it might not be CRTPA policy. I welcome the opportunity to look into that a little further, but I'm glad that we've already got that up front. And the last thing is, I do believe strongly there's going to be a push for legislative action on the MCOR's bill. I'm going forward after and I will say it openly, that is my hope. That's what you would hear from me tomorrow if you listen to the meeting. Greg Slay and I had a meeting with a number of people from Atkins and FDOT a week ago Friday, and I've actually added an amendment to encourage changing that legislation. And it's really focused on the 5-year work plan for FDOT and kind of separating MCORS from that work plan, so we make sure that we don't harm any projects for our MPO or anyone else around the state. A lot of other issues packed into that, but that's the most germane to what we've been working on. I would suggest that our MPO, CRTPA, may want to look at this issue at our next meeting if there is legislation introduced and take a stand on that. So again, only because the memo was on the agenda do I have, I feel like I should bring this up. I would have waited until after the final report was submitted. But this is kind of a heads up that I would like to see this come back for discussion of CRTPA in the near future. So that's where I am. Thank you. Thank you all for looking at this issue.
Thank you, Commissioner Dozier. Any other comments on this issue? Okay. That would bring us to, are there any items from CRTPA board members to discuss?
Real quick, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Minor?
Thank you. Just wanted to say there's some really exciting projects on today's agenda. So kudos to the CRTPA staff, Greg, and everybody else, as well as Kimley Horn. Thank you very much.
Any other comments before we adjourn?
Mr. Chair, I apologize. We skipped right over that Highway 90 bike trail and without questions, because it's such a great project, I would hope. But I want to give a shout out to Commissioner Barfield. I know she has been working on this project and others very hard. I had a briefing with Greg and other staff a few months ago in Kinley Horn, and we're just making great progress, and the Sun Trails is a critical piece here. So I'm really excited about that project. I really appreciate Commissioner Barfield's work. Thanks.
Any other comments? We are adjourned.
Thank you all for coming today.
Okay.